Hey, good afternoon, guys. My name is Gustavo Bautista, and I will be presenting on my El Capitan expedition in 2024. In this presentation, I will be overviewing my journey, preparation, and the logistics of my El Capitan expedition in the summer of 2024. We will cover individual and team training, logistical considerations, tactical challenges, safety considerations. So what is El Capitan? El Capitan is a 3,000-foot granite cliff face in Yosemite National Park, California. Notoriously known in the documentary Free Solo, it is a mecca for rock climbers around the world, a playground for single rope picnic enthusiasts. In this expedition, the cliff face was rigged with a single continuous rope, and we rappelled and climbed along the dawn wall for a couple of days. And here's a photo of Alex Honnold on the infamous freerider route on El Capitan. What is SRT? Single rope technique is a climbing method that utilizes a single rope for both ascending and descending, commonly used in caving as a means for access and exploration. And in this photo, we have a photo of Rainbow Cave, Rainbow Pit. And as you can see, we're using the rope as a means to access the bottom of the pit. And so I just wanted to briefly go over my SRT journey from the beginning, because we all start from somewhere, and I just wanted to put out there that if you put in the effort into learning SRT, it'll take you to a lot of places. So my journey began with the Grotto back in September 2021. I remember attending my first DCG campout at the Billy Goat Point campout. During the campout, I saw people rappelling the cliffs at the campsite, and many people returned to the campout with their stories of the vertical trips they just had done on Fox Mountain. Hearing and seeing people rappel and climbing ropes piqued my curiosity. It felt like I was missing out, and that same weekend I went home Sunday, researched vertical caving videos, and ordered a bunch of gear from On Rope One. I didn't know anything practical about vertical, so I started learning changeovers on a small tree. Eventually, I went to a small cliff in Roswell, Georgia, called Allenbrook House Unit, and shortly after, I signed up for a DCG vertical training course to learn more and more proper vertical caving etiquette. Here's the photo of my graduating class for that training. Eventually, that same month, Halloween of 2021, I went to my first vertical cave, Johnson's Crook, and that same day, I had the opportunity to bounce two other pits, Rock Shelter Pit and Cemetery Pit. By that point, I knew vertical caving was going to be a passion of mine. Over time, I caved more, and the drops just kept getting deeper and bigger, and I found an appreciation for long vertical rappelling and climbing. I caved caves I thoroughly enjoyed. I caved other caves I will not care to return to. Here are a couple of my favorite drops. We have Sotano de la Golondrina. That one's around 1,200 feet. Fantastic Pit in Elephant Cave. Hoyo de la Luz in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. Incredible Pit in Elephant Cave. Smoky One in Elephant Cave. Parode Pit out in Jackson County, Alabama. And of course, Never Sink at Eagle Chasm. Here's a photo of a group trip we took over to Mexico over the winter of 2022 and 2023. It was a phenomenal trip, and I highly recommend going to this cave. This one was Sótano de las Golondrinas. But even after all this, sometimes we ask ourselves, what is next? And in the back of my mind, I thought, it sure would be nice to rappel El Capitan one day. So how do you join an El Capitan expedition? If you aren't planning a trip, joining one is your best option. At the 2022 Tack Fall Cave-In, I met a fellow from the Kentucky, Ohio area by the name of Bo Gergel. He was a friend of my friend, Cody Kisner, and I took him to go bounce Fantastic Pit the Sunday of the cave-in. I expressed my interest in an El Capitan trip to him as I learned that he himself had been on a previous expedition. After that trip to Elephants, I didn't think much of our conversation until he messaged me and forwarded me an email about a possible El Capitan expedition being organized for the summer of 2024. This was going to be the very first expedition to be organized and executed since the pandemic, so I knew I had to hop on it. I knew no one on the email chain, but I sold myself to the trip organizers, and they gave me a chance to join the team. So to answer the question, it's best to know someone or be lucky, and I just happen to have luck on my side. And so in preparation, there was a lot that had to go into preparation for the trip. We'll briefly cover, we had team development, training and preparation, proficiency with long rappels, managing significant rope weight. The rope weight alone was around 170 pounds, give or take, depending on how the wind blew. We had to have backcountry skills, Of course, physical fitness. It was the park logistics, dealing with rangers and park regulations. And there was team assignments, just managing people and assigning people various tasks to ensure the success of our trip. And so the way I prepared for this trip was mainly by cross-training and living an active lifestyle. I was around 18 months of training to condition. I logged maybe around 700 miles of running. I did plenty of cycling and a lot of caving. And for the necessary gear to do El Capitan, well, the team kind of made us forced us to use rope walking systems and a 24-inch rack. And as you can see in this photo, we have the 24-inch rack off our D-ring, and we have spaces on there to accommodate for various rope weights. And overall, it also help with heat dissipation, so we can add more bars onto there. So instead of just rappelling on, say, 4 or 5 bars, we could be rappelling on 7 or 8 bars. And then for the sending system, we have our chest box. We have a chest roller, we have our rope feeds through, we have our ankle ascender for our fifth set, and our knee ascender for our fifth set. And it was kind of like climbing up a ladder, but you could go hands-free on this one, so it made climbing a lot easier. Other skills we had to have were backcountry skills, so knowing how to read a map, especially topography, knowing how to hike well with a loaded pack, if you're not just carrying your own gear, but also group gear, group food, carrying water. So there's a lot of stuff you had to put in your pack that wasn't just yours. You had to stay hydrated because the heat and the sun out in California is no joke. Out here in Georgia, you'll feel the humidity, but out there, it's sort of a dry heat. So it could sneak up on you, and next thing you know, you're dehydrated. Of course, staying well fed, primitive camping. You lose a lot of amenities once you're at the summit of El Capitan. Leave no trace, pack out what you take in. There was also first aid in the wilderness. We were lucky that we had plenty of people that had EMT experience and wilderness first aid. We also had to set up communication systems. We mainly used handheld radios. You had to have bear canisters too, according to park regulations, and anything that was food or was scented had to be in these canisters. And of course, there was the park regulations such as managing people on backcountry wilderness permits. And the wilderness permits were perhaps the very important thing to have people camping at the summit, because without these permits or having some people in the group with these permits, we could not camp out there. So as far as communications went, in order to stay in constant contact with teammates on the summit, we used radios throughout the park to communicate. And due to the range limitations of handheld radios, we stationed a repeater during the day near the park meadow, which augmented the range, allowing us to effectively communicate. And so in this photo, this is typically where we pulled up with this white van, unloaded our communication gear, and the gear is off the photo, but we had a power source, a repeater, and an antenna, and that gave us the sufficient range to communicate from the base all the way to the summit. And even out here in the meadow, we had a spotting scope, which allowed us to give eyes on our rappellers from the moment they stepped off the edge all the way to the tree line. So for team preparation, there was continuous team training over 18 months. And due to the proximity of various teammates, various team trainings were conducted throughout the year at various locations. We had plenty of people from the Midwest, some people from the New England area, from Virginia, from the South. So we had to make it work for each other. But in terms of what the team obligated from us, we had to attend 2 required trainings, and that was sufficient enough to be on the team. So it was 2 out of the 4 required trainings. And we had 10 non-required trainings, but they were also important because they gave you the opportunity to practice things that you normally cannot practice on your own, such as weighted rappels, weighted changeovers, rope treadmilling, bouncing ideas off your partner. The first required team training I attended was at Whitesides. And Whitesides is around a 650-foot sheer cliff face in North Carolina. It is a fantastic rappel. I believe the best rappel east of the Mississippi in terms of getting off on a cliff. The second team training I attended was Hawking Hills in Ohio. It was a neat, free-hanging cliff face. We practiced weighted rappels, weighted changeovers, working the haul system, edge gauge scenarios, and rope treadmill. And here we have a photo of two of our teammates tandeming. We had various ropes dropped off down by the cliff face, and not in this photo, we had a rope treadmill off to the side. And so moving on to team assignments, we had various assignments throughout the week. We had our hikers that had a backcountry permit, so the group can camp on the summit. And so the way this worked is that two people are designated to go pick up their wilderness permits, and then they hike the group up to the summit. They camp. The following day, two more people would come in, and the people from the day previous would rappel off or hike out, depending on what they wanted to do. So we had a constant stream of people just cycling through, but we always had to have a permit up there so we could be camping and having our tents up there. We had drivers drive people around the park. They were very vital because they could be shuttling people before dawn or at midnight, depending on the needs of where climbers had to be, where hikers had to go. In the meadow, we used a spotting scope to track rappellers and communicate to the belay team and to set up communications. And again, this was a very important job, as we will see later on in a later slide. But overall, they had vision on our rappellers from the very tip of the summit all the way to the tree line where they lost view. We had our belayers that provided belay services for our rappellers, and they were at the base, so just past the tree line. We had our climbers, and they partnered up and climbed in the evening and throughout the night. In terms of park logistics, of course, we had to let the rangers know what we were doing. There was notice given to them that, hey, we're going to come out here, we're going to rappel, we're going to climb. We have this experience. We've done it so many times, and that went well for us. And in order to stay in the park as long as we did, the group had to reserve park lodging. We reserved park lodging at Curry Village. By setting up home base in Curry Village, the group dispersed into various areas of the park throughout the trip. Furthermore, Curry Village was close to various amenities in the park, such as the shuttle, food store, and showers. The real importance about renting out Curry Village was that it allowed us to stay in the village for various days. So the day after we arrived into the park was rig day. And this was perhaps the important day because if we can't fix the rope, we cannot rappel, we cannot climb. And so on rig day, there were two groups assigned with various tasks that would ultimately rig the 3,000 foot of PMI pit rope to the top of El Capitan. And here is our rope, stuffed in a couple bags. And they had to walk that across the road, and it's sort of a chain gang. So for the top rig team was settled by a driver to Lucan Lake Trailhead. The team was equipped with camping gear, rigging, hauling gear, and other group gear such as water bags and meals. They rigged up a haul system to a tree and lowered a 5mm line with a sandbag on the end to the base of a Capitan. And so here in our photo, you can see this tree in the back. That was our terminal anchor, and that was a wrap 3 frictionless. And then we wrapped it around this other tree. And then we had this other tree as a redirect to get it more so where we favored it to go at the edge. And so on this closest tree, you see there's a haul system. And this is what we use to haul up the main line to introduce slack into the system so our rappeller can transfer onto the rope, negotiate the lift, and get free hanging. And so the bottom rig team on rig day hiked the 3,000 foot rope to the base of El Capitan in multiple duffel bags. Once they received the sandbags from the top rig team, they attached a 5mm line to the 11mm line. The 11mm line is hauled up to the top using mechanical advantage. They use a windmill hauling method where multiple people are pulling on at the same time walking. And once they run out of walking space, they detach themselves from the haul line and circle to the back of the line and just continue hauling. And I'd say this was perhaps the most efficient way to do it. It's better than pulling, resetting, pulling. And so later on that day, we received our first propellers. Once the main climb line was fixed, we had 3 people come down And this was the time of excitement because it was the first time we could have fun after so much training and preparation. Rappelling could take anywhere from 6 to 35 minutes, depending on the individual. That evening, I was at the base of El Capitan when we received the 3 people. And afterwards, it was my time to climb with my friend Chad McCain. And over here, we have a photo of a person rappelling. And we will visit this photo again later on. And so for the first climb, it was a fun climb. I had to feed a lot of rope through my ascenders to start off the climb. We started before sunset around 7:01 and climbed up, and we could really feel the heat radiating off the wall. It was hot, and I think I just had just enough water to make it to the very top. Eventually the sun set, and I topped out in the darkness, and I finished my first climb in around 2 hours and 5 minutes, and Chad finished his around 18 minutes quicker than me. It was a good climb overall, and at the top I had dinner and went off to bed in the available tent. And here's a photo of my friend Chad McCain and his edge attendant Kevin. Here's a photo of our campsite up there. It's pretty nice. Awesome views, would recommend. And this is a photo of how Half Dome looked as I climbed up that evening. It was absolutely beautiful. Photos do not do it justice. It was a very memorable moment. And so for rappelling, this was perhaps the longest and will probably be the longest rappel in my entire life. Big wall rappelling is slightly more complex than most in-cave rappelling. You have to factor in more variables than in-cave rappelling, such as significant rope weight. The rope weight alone is around 170 pounds. But once you factor in, say, wind, the wind will push the rope off to the side and increase the stretch in the rope, making it around, I would say, 180, 190. And then we had the thermal updrafts coming up from the wall. And so basically there were thermal updrafts that would come up, and as you rappel, you kind of just stop, which wasn't good because you had to keep feeding the rope to your rack, else you blade the rope. But you negotiate these by just like slightly feeding the rope to the rack, and then once the thermal passes, adjust the friction and just continue on your rappel. You also had an active belay underneath. So there were 2 belayers underneath you at the very bottom of the base, and they would essentially keep the line a little taut. That way, if wind does blow in hard, the line is already a little taut and it's not slamming into the wall. And by having them on belay, it essentially added a little more rope weight. And of course, you had to manage heat on your rack. You had to keep moving, and once you get to the bottom, you had to take off that rack quick because that rack was hot. So for the rappelling procedure, you would call on rope and rappel to the edge on a 9mm active line. Then you would transfer it over to the 11mm line, which is the main line, and you will call haul. And your team will introduce untensioned ropes into the system. And that's this photo over here. They pull on it. They use progress tractor on the pulley right here. And they allow slack to come up to the rope so you can reeve in your rack and rappel close to the Jumar, hauling the rope up. You will call weight, and your team will release the weight. And you will adjust friction and rappel close to the Jumar. You will remove the Jumar, rappel a little, and return the Jumar around to where you removed it from the rope. From there, you rappel to the base, being mindful of your speed and the thermals. And so here is a photo we were visiting. Here is our edge attendant. And this is a very important person because they give an extra set of eyes to make sure that, say if you're sleep deprived, you're doing the right thing. You're getting on the right rope. You're putting on the proper amount of senders. You're always on rope. Here we had our edge roller. We use this instead of the pad, and this is excellent. And down here, as you can see where the rope bends, that is where our Jumar is. And that is what hauls up the main line and provides the slack into the system. And so this guy is rappelling down. He's going to rappel close to it, haul for the weight. He's going to get the weight. He's going to adjust friction, rappel close to the Jumar, take off the Jumar, rappel a little, and then return the Jumar around to where he took it off. So I had the opportunity to climb again a few days later. I started the climb with my friend Don Davis around 3:30 in the morning. There was a slight urgency to finish because the sun comes out early in the morning, like around 5 something in the morning, and it would mean the last 10 of the night will be getting baked in the morning sun. I finished the climb around an hour and 44 minutes, and my friend Don finished around an hour 57 minutes. Overall, it was a fantastic climb, unforgettable. The valley was completely moonlit. It's something I may never experience again, and it's something that photos and videos would not do justice. And so here's a photo of me and my friend Don Davis. We had just finished our climb. We had just had a little breakfast, snack. And so for those who feel like you're in your middle age, you feel like you've done aged out of these big drops, think again, because at the time of this photo, my friend Don was around 57 years old. So if he's 57 and he could do El Capitan in under 2 hours, I don't know. That's pretty inspirational. I wouldn't say it's too late as long as you put in the time and effort into it. By the time we reached the summit, the sun was beginning to rise. I knew I was not going to sleep and running on a nap the evening before I managed to rappel later that morning. And so on the last day for climbing, I was told I would be climbing, and I was sent off to take a nap. And I went out to Curry Village to fall asleep, and I couldn't sleep well. So I walked out the tent and was given notice that I would not be climbing anymore. Rappelling and climbing activities were suspended as someone had a near miss. So I was napping when this happened, so I do not know the specifics of the series of events. But to my understanding, a teammate passed the Jumar on rappel and soon after went into an uncontrolled rappel. The belay team was radioed in, and they managed to stop the teammate at around 1,000 feet into the rappel. So they stopped her, and then soon tension was released so she could get to the bottom. And the teammate rappelled to the bottom still at a slightly uncontrolled speed, hit a branch close to the end of the rappel, but she was fine. She got lucky. She just had blistered hands and a bruised ankle. And this is typically how we receive our rappellers on the photo to the right. So we typically have one or two people. They pull them in, make sure they don't slam into this slope, and they help guide them onto a soft landing and help them get their rack off. Here's another photo. This is depicts the belay setup. And so up to the upper right, we had a pulley, and that's what we redirected our belay on. And then it's not on the photo, but further down there's a screed slope. And we always had two people with their fenders on the belay line. In case there was a need of a belay, they will run down the screed slope, put all their way onto it, and stop the person. But in this case, we had those two people, and there was two people up around here in this area, the upper right-hand area. And so they too got on belay. So it's 4 people on the line. And that second half, they couldn't really stop her, but she turned out fine. With all rappelling and climbing activities called off for the remainder of the day or for the entire trip, they devised a plan to lower gear and hike people off the mountain. The following morning, using the 5mm haul line, they lowered duffels of camping and miscellaneous group gear to the base of the mountain. The D-rig team up top packed up and started to hike off. And some of us at the bottom wanted to do something. We didn't want to sit around while they were doing all the work. So we hiked in to meet them somewhere along the trail and take some of the group gear off their back. After we retrieved some of the group gear, a couple of us decided to hike down into the valley via the Yosemite Falls Trail. It was a steep, knee-beaten hike, and we basically turned an incident response into an enjoyable day of hiking and helped our teammates out. Once everybody was off the mountain and in the valley, we had a pizza party to celebrate the successful trip of rappelling El Capitan. And in reflection, even with a near miss, we could celebrate a successful trip at El Capitan because we developed and worked as a team. We learned and followed the set procedures to rappel and climb safely. And in this case, even when something failed, we followed the safety precautions of communicating, belaying, and having proper incident response. We had each other's backs and motivated each other to do well. And just to illustrate how this could have ended, say, a worst case scenario, back in 1992, there was somebody that actually brute forced the rappel across the lip at the very top instead of using a Hall system. And so he probably did it with few bars on his rack, which later on led to an out of control rappel, and he basically slammed into the base and passed away. So to say that this was a success, uh, I mean it because we actually followed the procedure and everybody made it back home. And so my takeaway from the trip was just to live in the moment. Throughout the trip, I kept asking myself, when is the next time I'm going to return to do this again? To which I can only respond, I do not know. And even if I do return, it probably won't be with the same people. These people listed over here, I'll probably never see them again or probably ever do repelling activities with again. So it's just a time just to enjoy and the shared experience. So ultimately, to enjoy the adventure, challenge, and camaraderie. And if you want to look into a documentary very similar to what I did, I'd highly recommend screenshotting this slide and checking out the video. I think it's around under an hour. So it gives a great overview of what we did that week. And I will open up the questions if anybody has questions.
Hey, Gustavo, this is Steve. I have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, sir.
You said that whenever you woke up because of the incident, the rappels and climbs were called off. Was that called off by the Rangers or by your team?
It was by the team. They were mainly concerned about the rope being overglazed, and they didn't want to risk sending somebody down the rope if the rope happened to be compromised.
Okay. And a couple other things. What was if you had to say one best thing about the experience, what would be the best thing? The,
I would say just being in the moment, just sharing the experience with my teammates, and just being there in awe of the beauty of Yosemite.
yeah. Okay. Good thing. One last thing. When are you going to do Half Dome?
Oh, I don't know, Steve. I don't know many rig points up there. Might have to. I don't know if the bolts you use are
Big,
still there.
big bolts. Do it.
Hopefully one day.
Okay.
Gustavo, did someone take like exposure photos? Is that what I'm looking at right now? Is that the same person climbing up?
Yes. So this was probably a tandem, and so we had a couple of photographers there, so they had experience in terms of doing long-term exposure photos.
That's awesome.
Gustavo, what did you like have in your bag when you were like rappelling and climbing? What were the things that you took?
Well, that's an excellent question, Alex. I had a sleeping liner, maybe around 3 liters of water, chocolate, maybe like energy bar, and a baguette. Cannot forget the baguette.
And the sleeping bag liner was in case you got cold or whatever?
It was to be respectful of other people camping in the tents. The tents already had a sleeping pad and a sleeping blanket.
Gotcha, understood. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you so much for presenting, Gustavo.
Thank you for having me.